Let's see what we got going here. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Lou Jensen, and this is the weekly get-together for the INE Network, Inspiration and Encouragement Network. We're a bunch of wannabe artists that have kind of picked up carving, engraving, and sandblasting and airbrushing programs that we've sold for almost 30 years. We've been a PALS network of support for a very long time, and we've been on the web doing webinars for 7 years. Actually, tonight kind of starts the 8th year. And as we get into tonight's show, I've launched kind of a special concept that I think is quite helpful to moving your life from your hobby and having it in just the hobby format where you play and enjoy it, but come over here and put it into the business format so that you can then write everything off and hopefully turn it into a successful business. So our webinars are mostly from what I call the Artistic Business Association, the ABA, where we try and help artists do a better job in the marketplace. As we start tonight's show, let me get things ready. Oh, I gotta hit some other buttons first here. Let me go launch this and go into a screen share. As we get started with tonight's show, it's kind of a special time for me because 30 years ago this week, 31 years ago this week, I launched the company. An attorney for the friend of mine and CPA got the paperwork already, and I signed it on Joyce's kitchen tabletop on September the 12th, 1983. And so in my direction of going and remembering how it's gone and how far it's come, way more than I thought it would to begin with, I remember thinking, I actually wondered if it was even wise for me to even be playing around and messing around with that kind of an idea. And I have been doing some help with sandblasting with one of our members, and she's really been struggling, and it's hard for me to kind of get past the point where you don't know anything to where you begin to get it. You begin to understand what's going on in the technical side of things. Then we've got the whole other side of the coin is how in the world do I make a buck doing it? As I've worked forward over the years with trying to pull something together that would be a talent discovery network, basically, it's always been interesting to me the people who pick things up and seem to do well as opposed to those who seem to not do as well. And I'm quite curious about this subject tonight because double checking your efforts is not the best way to go at making things work after the fact. Double checking as you're heading into things does make a huge difference. And so we'll go through this tonight, and then we'll visit together with each other as we finish up the show and open up the film strip of those who are attending. I realize tonight that I'm competing with the president for this valuable, precious time, so I appreciate all of you coming and sitting in with me. You can obviously catch me or him on DVR later, which is kind of how we all do everything nowadays. But I appreciate both of those that come and are here with me live tonight. I spent 3 days this weekend up at the Utah State Fair with Brian Beatty, one of our masters, and Brian had agreed to come and demonstrate for almost a full day each day. And they set up a really elegant tent for him, and he was outside the Creative Arts building, and he had little turkey eggs, chicken eggs that they could carve, and they had goose eggs that they could carve. And so they set up and would pay just for the material costs, and then he would teach them how to do the artistic carving with the power pen. And what a fun time we had. We just, I mean, it was the most unimposing, ordinary 3-day get-together, but every time you sit down and do an event like this and begin to do some event marketing, you learn and you grow in experience. You see things that you could then do better that would be a part of your planning the next time. And Brian has been fun because he literally will not turn down any offer for exposure. But he's done enough of that that now things are coming back to him. He had put quite a few entries into the Utah State Fair with his jewelry and his artistic efforts. He's carved a Celtic cross on a chrome brooch that I've just got to get photographed and get up for you to see. It is one of the most elegant things I've ever seen done. And to spend the time and watch him work with children who have never seen anything like this before and get them started, you have to think into the future and say, well, a few of these kids won't be interested in going in the same direction, but some of them will. Some of them had never, all of them had never had a chance to try anything artistic, and it's always a good response with our setup. And these kids just literally, it was just a joy to watch them get so wound up and so excited, and to have Brian actually encourage that and nudge that along. But I guarantee you this, they will never forget this weekend. Those that got to do it, it was just a joy. And I was startled at the parents who, as soon as they found out it was a demonstration of an art thing for their children, some would literally just grab them on the shirts and drag them out of there. It was like, oh my God, I don't want my kid to become an artist. You could just see it and hear it in the reaction of the parents. And it always disturbs me so much when I see that kind of response. When a parent doesn't nudge and help their child become more creative, I think, what in the world is going on in your brain, folks? Brian is leaving in 2 weeks. He'll be in Europe now for 3 months. His third trip back, and to develop his relationship, his exposure, particularly in Bulgaria, and to have this advantage in his life growing is just fun to watch that whole thing unfold. And he's now got it down to a point where he knows what's going on more because he's done it before. But Brian is, from his background and his technical expertise, Brian really likes the carefulness, the planning, and the preparing part of this whole effort. But I think most in my network, in the artistic right-brain circles, do not. And as I look back preparing the show, kind of looking through my years of being a dad, my years of dentistry, my mission efforts as a kid, my years of scout mastering, the Little League coaching, especially learning to fly, developing the drills, sculpting eggshells, what I did on guns, the engraving of windows and cars, learning to do event marketing, and the forming of the company. Every element of my life has required a plan of action before the action. And I like to do it. I spend a lot of time planning and thinking things through. When I started to learn to fly, it pressed me in a way that I had never known before. Because if you make a mistake when you're up in the air, you don't get a second chance often. And so all of a sudden it meant a great deal more to me to be prepared. And one of the things that was the most interesting element of all of my early flight training was a pilot's checklist. And when it's so serious, you can't miss anything. And all of you who know me well know that I tend to miss some things at times. My brain's going in a couple of different directions all the time, and occasionally I just drop the ball completely. And when you're a pilot, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. Most people don't even like driving with me, much less getting in an airplane with me. And so the pilot's checklist made it a little bit more reasonable, because I knew that this had to be taken care of, this had to be taken care of, and it's the checklist before you fire up the motor. It's before you even go, and you file a flight plan, you do everything you can possibly do to increase the odds of getting up there safely and getting back down safely. The fact of the matter in life is you never know when a bit more planning and preparation is going to improve the odds of your own individual success. So as I'm going through this checklist a little bit tonight, what I'm hoping for is that you will potentially see some areas that you could improve in your planning process, because I think it has more of an impact than most people realize. If you miss something, then things really get troublesome, and they generally get really stressful, and it also costs more money to go back and solve the problems. I went on the web and went looking, and Regina's done the book Success Against All Odds, and I'm going, here's the title right there, Success Against All Odds. Every one of you could have a book about your own individual success, just like this one. And when you realize that this is a subject, this is a concept in the world of success and success building that really deserves attention. It deserves constant attention. Ron and I had a visit this morning, and we talked about some of the elements of success, which are pretty pervasive, from Zig Ziglar to Tom Hopkins, and every one of them who talk about the successful side of selling. You'll always hear this odds of success thing. It is something that says, okay, the odds to begin with are generally against you. And I've used this concept in my own life. It's in my personal journal, and it shows up. Shows up all the time, because occasionally the dragon wins. And it's so important to realize that obviously somebody's planning wasn't quite as thorough here as it probably ought to be. I remember the first time I saw this cartoon, I just sat there and all but cried because it was so funny. And that is a realistic factor, but this fear factor in our world isn't the same as it is when you're trying to fly in a plane or when you're trying to fight a dragon. And I think that tends to make us back off a little and think, well, I'm not going to have to worry too much about it. Then I found this one by J.R., and it's so fun. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him. And that has to make a measurement on each of our efforts. Most of you are pretty aware of, I've got about 10 frontiers in my life right now that I'm really trying to move to a finishing position. I pretty much feel like that my parents have passed away, a lot of my friends have passed away, there's things going on now that I've got only so much time left. And not a one of us can calculate how much time, realistic time, we do have left. And so to prepare and pull off some of these last 2 or 3 dreams that I'm after really require that the dragon doesn't show up when I don't want it to. Managing the dragons is huge. But failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And to me, that just about says it all. If you're not paying attention to what's going on in your efforts, then you're going to have things that are going to get messed up all the time, because you're going to miss this, you're going to miss that, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. It's always, always, always expensive when you miss something. If you got to go back and redo things, then whoa, gee whiz, it's nasty stuff. Time and money both. So the idea of getting ahead of it, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, Grandma Jessie, raised this bush in her yard. She had a whole row of them down the side of her yard on the south side, and when they come out in late May and June, they're one of the prettiest plants in the world. And she passed away at age 200. She took care of her own garden clear till she was 80 years old. And whenever I would work with her in the garden, which was part of what was required as a grandson or a granddaughter, was to learn how to work the garden, and she would constantly remind me to look twice and weed once. which is pretty much the subject we're going at tonight, to try and see if we can't look at things a little more careful, pay a little bit more attention, and re-examine what we think we're getting into up front to try and get it into a position where we're actually accomplishing a little more. Okay? It's tough because we just do know this stuff, but we just don't always do it. The habit patterns of how we go at things gets involved, and then all of a sudden we really, really have trouble. And especially when I would go do shows. When I was going out on the shows, they're expensive, they're time-consuming, they're a bit of a challenge up front. And I learned to do checklists pretty damn quickly because you're likely to forget something. And if you're at an event and you forgot something critical and something important, things really get messy in a hurry. So the idea is to do a double check constantly to see if things are going kind of the way we should, okay? And I like the idea that we're doing this together. If you have the list to begin with, then you begin to overcome the fears. Not that it isn't still there to a degree, but you begin to get more confidence and more comfortable with this list. So if you've got individual areas of doing in your life and you've not got a checklist, now's the time to kind of rework all that, because there should be a pattern that you have and that you use to help with your own individual productivity. I don't think it's an accident that you make a list and check it twice at Christmas time. We all know how important it is not to forget some people in our lives at Christmas time. And the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. Is that not profound? It's so interesting that this time of the year is when the country goes back to work. I've worked with the calendar of the year. We've talked about it often in the shows. If you're in business and you don't know how things work as far as the annual calendar, you're just going to miss all the major trends, and then you're going to have trouble making things work in the marketplace. And right now, we've gone through the summer, we've fired back up, got the kids going back to school, and it moves into fall. And fall is harvest time. And the very least you can do in your life is figure out what you hope for, and the most you can do is live inside that hope. Not admire it from a distance, but live right in it, right under its roof. The world shifts into a really industrious mode in the fall because now it's harvest time. And over the centuries, as hunters and gatherers and RNA and DNA being passed on down, and the spirit of it all, I think it's pretty pervasive the world over. When we move through a growing season and the planting and growing season, and then we move to harvest time, it's the time when a lot of things go into high gear. And we can either avoid that or we can mistakenly misjudge that. It's the get things done time. And Lance is visiting, he's on with us tonight, was up visiting a couple of weeks ago and had classes with Craig and Robin, and it was a joy to have him come because I know it took a great deal of planning and preparation for him to pull that off and to bring that advantage into his life. But I want you, and he we'll watch it with him, the progress that he's going to make now. He is going to step up every element of his life, and I think the planning and preparing and the double checking is what really starts to open that door. I wanted to share with you tonight, I think I've done it in the shows before, but this is one story. I don't repeat it a lot, but it's one story that really changed Lou Jensen's thinking. I've always had a little bit of a problem when somebody told me I had to do something. It's, if I believe in it and I understand it and whatever, then I'll usually comply. But if I don't, then I'm kind of a stubborn old cuss. And when I was young scoutmaster in Utah, we had an incident happen in Idaho. And it's the kind of thing that shows up quite frequently. As I looked on the web and double-checked these same kinds of things, often when it's hunting season, we make miscalculations and poor judgment shows up, and that's usually really serious. You get into a situation where you're in the mountains hunting and playing and doing everything, and then you just don't think that the snow's going to show up, except it does. And these guys from Idaho decided to go up on the last day of hunting season and go just drive around in their truck and see if they could get one more shot at a buck. And I've seen it happen, and I've done this same stupid trick myself. And you just literally throw your stuff in the truck, and at the end of the day, they got off work, jumped in the truck, and away they went. And they went up and drive around a bit, see what they could find, and they told their families where they were headed. Except as they drove up, they decided to go 40 miles south of where they were supposed to be. So they went to a different place. They got in their truck quickly. They didn't take any gear. They didn't take any food. They didn't take anything. They just went up. And then all of a sudden, they ended up with a freaky snowfall. They got stuck in the evening at night, and so they stayed and waited, but it got, I think, like 2 to 4 feet the next morning was snowed on the ground. Now, because they'd not done any prior planning and not launched a flight plan, an accurate one, now they're completely on their own. And 1 second they think they're just having the greatest time you can possibly have on the mountain, and the next second they're really in trouble. So they tried to hike out, and the one guy got his feet froze. So they went back to the truck and got in the truck and tried to survive. And I guess they were there for 3 or 4 days, 5 days maybe. And finally it started getting really desperate, and no one was coming. So the guy who stayed at the truck wrote a note to his wife, and he eventually shot himself with his pistol. He didn't want to die, suffer anymore, and so he took his own life. And then the other guy left, even before that happened, went, tried to hike out. And he got to a fire tower for the Forest Service and broke in, and there happened to be food there, but he took his boots off, and they swelled up overnight, and he couldn't get shoes back on for 10, 15 days. And so he was stuck there too. And by this point, everybody figured they were both dead and gone. They couldn't have possibly survived, and they couldn't find him anywhere. But 32 days later, he walked into town. And he did manage to survive. And the interesting part is then they found his friend, and the way things looked, it looked like he had killed his friend. And so they literally arrested him and put him on trial for murder for his buddy. And there's no way to know whether that happened or it didn't, but it sure didn't feel like that should have been a threat to him. After all he'd been through, then he was put on trial for murder, and he was exonerated and eventually found not guilty. But what odd, and I had nightmares thinking about all that those two went through just because they jumped at the moment. They didn't think it through very far, zero planning, zero preparation, and it cost one of them their life and messed up the other one from now on. And I decided that never again, scoutmastering and with my family or me personally, would I ever get caught like this. And I've been awfully thorough ever since.
Yeah.
Just don't allow that to happen anymore.
Yeah. I'm no joke.
Who's got their their microphone on? Can you see that, guys? Who's got the mic open still?
It's Elena.
Elena?
Yeah,
Elena, she got it. Okay, all right. So, how does a person improve these circumstances? When I've been out on the mountain and played like that for my whole life, I had a degree of false confidence in my ability to manage, which is exactly what caught these two guys. And so looking at how you do things tonight really ought to be a big issue in your checklist of doing, so that every time you go out, you improve. When you're going to go make an investment, you really have to kind of know what in the world you're getting into ahead of time, not after the fact. When I do my blasting class, this is the first thing we start with, to where I try and have people realize how much is going on when you're sandblasting. You have all these variables to pay attention to, because they every one affect how the blast results turn out. And the number one is the choice of the artwork. If you choose bad artwork, you're going to really have problems. You literally have to be careful of what you pick in order to blast, in order to make it work out. And it's quite a bit different in the variables with which equipment, which kind of system that you actually use. Because you can go at this really with big stuff and do headstones, or you can do it with the microblaster and get into the range that I've played with the most, which is something that actually makes some serious money. But if you don't know all these things exist and don't know how to use each of these variables will choke off your results dramatically. When you're trying to get something done, it better work out reasonably fast, or you don't make any money. $1.50 an hour to do something for the governor is not productive. And yet so many artistic types will put up with that. They don't even pay any attention to it. I'm thinking, oh, that's not smart. The whole idea is to get this on here quickly. Every time I do a piece, one of these books, one of these crystal books for the Shakespearean Festival, I've got all this artwork is already done. All I have to do is type in the computer who's it's being given to and why it's being given and the date, and then I insert this pattern in here. So I stick this one on, I can burn this off in 3 minutes, dry it in a few more minutes, and then stick it on the glass surface, put this in here and stick that on, and blast this thing out. And if I've got 20 minutes into it, I'd really be surprised. 30 at the most. And I built $300 a piece for them. And I've been working toward that kind of goal of productivity for a long time, and I think it takes planning and preparation. You just aren't going to be able to get your productivity up in a range where it can be really productive when you don't really still know what you're doing. So if you do like Covey always suggests, is that you begin on each project with the end in mind, and then you start trying to allow in your checklist for every variable, everything that you know is going to affect the overall productivity. You begin to formulate that pattern from this to this to this to this. And as you do that and do a better job of it and standardize it with your own checklist, you're going to do better, okay? And how you think and how you go at it will be the degree of success that I think you'll find. Not what you are thinking, it's what were you thinking. You see the difference here? This is planning and preparation. This is when you're taking out, this is where I'm headed, but this is how I'm going to get there. And I think it takes a lot to do that, a lot to figure that out. Tomorrow is the 9/11 anniversary of all the trouble that happened in this country and all the stuff that's causing such a big war, big battle zone between us and the extreme Islamic world. We don't ever forget 9/11, but I don't ever forget 9/12, because 9/12, 31 years ago this week, was when I launched the company. And just about all of you have these same kind of dates, checklist in your life. This happened here, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here, and that then now has brought you to where you are now. And I really enjoy September 12th every year. It's the time when almost no one thought I was doing the right thing. Everybody thought I'd lost my ever-loving marble. When this article came out in the Salt Lake Tribune, it basically launched the entire effort, and I got a lot of heat for it because dentists just aren't supposed to put an artistic bite into eggshells with their dental drills. And so I went up against every grain in the world to move this in this individual direction. And over the years, I've had some good times and I've had some tough times. It was the best of times and the worst of times is kind of how it always is. But if you look at your life tonight and try and consider, is there anything more that I can do? Is there anything that I should do less? That's a really good measurement to put on your doing. And then when you look at, should I start the project or should I stop the project? That's also a good measuring tool. And who would know about this concept? Is there anybody out there who could help you look at the measurement of your strengths and your weaknesses? Lance, when you were here with Robin and Craig, probably the greatest advantage you had and have ongoing now is someone who's as good as you hope to be, and they're very good and willing to share what they see as your strengths and weaknesses, and they help you measure it. Takes quite a personality to take that critique and not have it ruffle your feathers or keep you from doing anything more. But I don't know how else you do it. If you're going to do it all on your own, then how do you have this advantage come into your life? Jay, if you got your microphone on and you're still listening in, you're getting ready to go to your big reunion, your biker reunion. I thought it was really, really a cool logo. I posted it up there, and I thought, well, I'm going to throw that in the show tonight. How much trouble is it doing a show, Jay, when you forget something, especially something important? I don't know if he can come back up. He's probably getting ready to go, actually, in the green room. He said he was getting ready to go. We all know the answer to that, don't we? It is a small nightmare when you're launching this kind of a big effort. It takes money and time to go, and if you get there without things you needed that you forgot, and I almost promise you, unless you've developed a checklist, you're going to run into trouble. Jason's posting quite a bit more, and I like how he does things. He's got his own presentation of his life coming along really, really well. And Jason just posted that he's building his new studio, and I wanted to give him some commendation and some encouragement to continue, because that's a good enough size space to really play in and really have a good time. But when you're trying to get this done here, what happens if you forget something? Could really, really be troublesome, couldn't it? When you don't have things arranged and you forget, then time and money go out the window. And I think because of the time it takes to review or double check is why we don't do it. We don't think we have enough time, so therefore we avoid double checking. Mel, when you do a show and you forget something, how difficult is it for you on the road?
Oh, it's almost
you never forget, do you?
Oh, hey, this last one, we bailed out of town, almost got out of the county, and had to turn around.
Oh, really?
Guess who forgot his meds?
Oh, no, shoot.
Oh, yeah. That's number one important thing.
Yeah.
I'm busy loading up the trailer and making sure I've got everything for the show. And the wife says, well, I packed the stuff for you. Okay.
I know you'll remember the time when Tammy came to Asheville to do a show.
Mm-hmm.
And she got there without all the things she really, really needed. And someone in our circle happened to help her with his compressor and his drill and his bits.
Who would do something like that?
Who would do a thing like that and just swarm into Tammy's life and help save her bacon again? And I could actually make a checkoff list of a whole bunch of times when you guys out across the country have done that very thing for all of us, and especially for the company. So
I went to Tulsa, had everything I needed, except a quick disconnect fitting between the Thomas compressor
Yeah.
and the hose.
Uh-oh.
I'm all set up, ready to do some engraving, and I can't get air.
Can't get there.
Well,
And
I'm in a
doesn't your heart just stop when that happens?
yeah, but fortunately, when we went out to dinner the night before, we had passed a Lowe's, and I remembered how to get to it.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, we can find the things we need along the way. I want you to notice this is Mel's life now. That's his trailer for his trips. That's your moped you take along the way, isn't it? Or do you take the big truck now?
Now we take the big truck now.
Take the big truck now, but notice the colors all the same. This is probably Mel's favorite color, and that's what he uses to go fishing with.
It's wife's favorite color.
Oh, okay. That's even more important.
Yeah, it's close to candy apple red. That works.
Very close to candy apple red. Now, if you know Mel's background in his life, he's been what do you call who you are? Do you have a professional term for your trade?
Well, I've been a welder and a pipe fitter and a plate fitter and a tool and die maker and a jig and fixture builder and a sheet metal mechanic.
And every one of those require a standardized method of work, don't they?
Yeah.
Every one of them. So is it any question that you have when you go about your pieces of your jewelry that you don't have kind of a step-by-step process of going at it?
I do, but it's all in my head. It's practice.
Okay, but you standardize it.
Over years of practice.
You know exactly what to do.
You know the steps you have to take in order to get to the end.
And you also know the critical ones. Okay, you know enough to know kind of where the danger is. When I was in dentistry, the real tricky time is when you inject someone to freeze them up and numb them up to get ready to do their dental work. And that's a really serious moment. And so every dentist knows there's a few things that better happen before you get into doing that injection, not after the fact, and then they have trouble. So everything that everyone does on a professional basis has this methodology, this plan of how we kind of go at it. But when we're over here building a piece like this, most of us would not have the same plan that Mel has acquired, because that's been his life. That's kind of how he's gone at everything. And I think that's now shows up in his work. He's standardized the kind of things that he's doing, and that then produces new and better results. So tonight, what I'd like you to do is, I've talked about the 10 next things you should do for the last several shows. And I'd like you to stand and do a checklist of what those things are, and then decide whether you're going to do more or less, more or less with those 10 efforts. And I've particularly been pushing this button for me. That's what I try to share in the shows, is the things that are challenging me. And I've really been affected by the people that have died this summer. I've had one friend after another pass away, and I just sit back and I go, Lord Lewis Jensen, you don't know either when things are going to get really serious, or you're going to have a heart problem or a brain problem, or you name it. I mean, there's just all kinds of things can happen now that could interfere with my productivity, and I have one more thing I want to get accomplished before I'm done. And so I've just gradually, even this week, started moving things more to where I'm going to concentrate on that number one and push the issue, because of the fact that I know I'm not going to get it done if I keep delaying it for everything else. When I played with Boy Scouts most of my adult life, at a national jamboree, we have about 80,000 men and boys, and we take 400 kids from our council every time. This is every 4 years. There's the national jamboree somewhere. And we had a guy who was the chairman of the council for a little while, when I was vice president with Jim, and we just kind of knew that if Jim Broadbent was in charge of the Jamboree, it was going to go off so well. It was scary. He's an orthodontist, and Jim is without a doubt the most checklist person I've ever been around in my life. But when you've got this much involved, you can't go out there with people that just write things on their shirt sleeve or the palm of their hand. You have to know that the last thing I wanted was to get in trouble with my scouts. And so scouting has this play ethic, this thing of teaching a young man how to be persistent and how to kind of take his life forward. But the thing that's most important is to try and help them get through this teenage generation when accidents and problems happen so quickly. And it was my constant fear with every scout troop I ever had. I had all the way from dental school on. I had a bunch of boys in my life, and I was always anxious about, because after you get to know them a little while, there's one or two or three that are really unhinged at times, and that then creates problem and potential for trouble for all of us. And so as we moved into going to the National Jamboree, we took a whole year every time to prepare. So a year ahead was when we started having meetings with the scouts. We began to figure out who was going. We got their health issues taken care of. There's this checklist 9 miles long now for doing council going to the National Jamboree because there's so much at risk. By the way, this is Steven Spielberg came to this year. I think this was 1989, and that walking stick he has in his hand right there is the one I carved for him at the Jamboree. The business has pressed me often at times when someone else gets involved in the decision-making process, and it's their productivity that then impacts yours. And you have to have a checklist or a plan to prepare for that kind of eventuality as well. Don't you kind of know that you start doing business with somebody, you kind of get a feel for whether they can deliver or whether they can't, whether they'll follow through or whether they won't. And if you're dependent on that delivery and that productivity, it can really, you start fudging and hedging the bets. And that's what happened with this collection. We did 30 cases of crystal goblets as a toast to Queen Elizabeth at Calgary, Canada. And every time I'd interact with that group up there that were trying to handle this big occasion, this has got to be one of the bigger things that ever happened to Calgary, I would get a different answer just about every time. And so I started playing defense pretty aggressively, and I still had a nightmare with those guys. And if I ever had to do it again, I would have this checklist, because we ended up having to ship all these cases overnight FedEx to get them there in time. They just put it off, and I couldn't get anybody to make a decision. And they almost destroyed the whole effort. And I barely pulled this one into the rabbit out of the hat at the last thing. So the trick of business is always getting ahead of things. I watched Brian work at his show, and he really has done enough of these kind of exhibits and demonstrations now. He knows things that he has to have. He's beginning to learn the things he doesn't need to bring. And as I started doing shows and trying to get to the point where I could get on a plane, make enough money that I could get on a plane and go do a show because I couldn't afford to take the time to drive, then I was sharpening the stick even more. And if you'll just learn to double check your efforts, just come back over what you're thinking, what you're going to do, make yourself a written kind of plan as you move towards your next effort, you're going to really, really enjoy the results. When I played with scouting as many years as I did, I would have my thank you gifts for people who helped me function with the council job that I had. And I got these all done. My son Chris would do the carving, do the finish work, get them all ready. And so then all we had to do was come in and put a name here and what it was for here. And with the high-speed equipment, you know you can do that quickly and easily. hit them with one last layer of clear acetate, and they were finished. So I got ahead of the game. And then this moved into doing work for the National Committee in Texas for Chris. And here's just a 16-year-old kid making several $1,000s a year just doing these wooden plates for the National Boy Scout Committee. And I think it was because they knew they could rely on us quickly. We could get something done and have it in their life, and they were always fun and attractive. And that's what they wanted most to support their effort and their program. When I bumped into Woody Searle, that period of time of meeting Woody and beginning to try and change Lou Jensen is without a doubt the most important transition in my entire life. When I first met Woody Searle, I was so unlike him, it was unbelievable. And as I've moved forward in my life, the dream of my life was to be more like Woody, because Woody's counsel for me was as solid as a rock. I learned quickly that I could depend on him. I knew because he had done what he was trying to help me learn how to do. I learned to trust him deeply, and that kind of thing really begins to resonate with you. It's something that you say, okay, I can see what it's done in Woody Searle's life. I'm going to just bust the nut here till I can pull that into my same life. That kind of mentoring is the role that I think we'll all grow into. I watched Brian this weekend pretty carefully, and he loves coaching somebody. He loves trying to help them see and learn what he's now learned how to do. And that, to me, is the value of the entire I&E network. I don't know anything that's going to be more productive for you. And I knew I needed to put his name down. Dave Wolf. When Dave Wolf first started playing with us, and he started engraving motorcycles, and he started working for a Harley dealership in Philadelphia, and they sent him to Europe to do an engraving event over there, and they all fell in love with him in Europe. So he was in a wheelchair, and he ended up going to Europe several times a year to do motorcycle engraving events. And if you think, well, I'm going to get me a derby cover or two, and I'm going to learn to do something. I'm going to learn to carve and engrave on these motorcycle pieces. And I know damn well I could have pushed this more and made it my whole life. Jay's doing this a bunch now, but there's so much out there, so much potential, and it's right under everybody's nose. Rick Nichols is one of our more famous masters. He lives in Arizona now, in Prescott. And Rick was really careful about measuring everything that he did. I've never bumped into anybody that was more careful at keeping track of his numbers, keeping track of his projects. He loved to plan. He worked for McDonnell Douglas, and so that was his role at the company professionally, but he pulled it into his engraving efforts, and he just carefully did everything by some plan and some measurement. Sarah Raines was similar. Sarah was the first commodities broker, female commodities broker in the history of Texas. And when Sarah started custom engraving, she crossed paths with Ross Perot in Dallas and ended up doing all kinds of wonderful stuff for corporate efforts. And I know that Sarah was constantly, I had occasion to do events and efforts with her. You could see it in her life that she always made a plan and she was always prepared. If there's anything in your life you can do now to gain more control of your own time, is to evaluate your planning. How are you going to do from now till Christmas? These really highly productive parts of the year demand that you have some kind of a plan. If you can't measure your effort and what you're going to do, then you probably are not likely to succeed either. That which you cannot measure, you cannot. Oh, yeah, that which you can, it should be managed right there, guys. I forgot to change that. Tonight forward, promise yourself to live with a little more zip and then get ahead of yourself. Try to work harder on your planning efforts so that you get more out of your efforts, more bang for the buck. And as you do that, you begin to make your job of climbing Success Mountain easier. it does help immensely. It produces tremendous rewards in your own life now. Okay? Why are you doing what you're doing most of your time? Are you trying to keep everybody else happy, or are you working on your own dreams and hopes? When I put this slide up a couple of shows ago, when it showed up on the web, I was so pleased with it because I like this image. I like this representation. Most of us go at it the way we've always done everything, and we really do need to come over here and play magic. This finding this better self, this better productivity, these efforts that will result in something that will be more productive for you is what the profitable hobby idea is all about. And the more you make those kinds of efforts in yourself, the more you bump into those who are doing what you're trying to do, and that alliance. I don't know if, I'm sure you're seeing it, what I see in the posts of everybody who's playing and learning and doing things together. This mixture that Google Plus is pulling into this now is the future of how to get connected and stay connected. It is the people who are bothering to do it and learning to do it and make it work are gaining quickly. They're finding out that they really do have what it takes to master something and then to uplift others as they're going through that effort and making that climb. And I'm proud as hell to bump into all of you, get to know all of you. Darwin's coming up. We just called this morning, coming up, and we're going to lunch over the weekend sometime. It's so fun to watch what Al and Mary are doing out there, to see what Craig and Robin are doing. I keep tabs with every one of you. Ron is on with us all the time. What a tremendous group of people to be associated with and working towards the developing of our own individual artistic efforts. We really have started something that has some tremendous potential and power in it. And I invite all of you who are new, who are looking in, listening in tonight, to come and participate with the I&E Network. Do more, not less. Make more plans, not less. And then hook up with those that are climbing the same mountain of success that you want to climb. Okay? Love to have you be involved. Now, I want to continue to visit about this subject with those who've done it. And I want to start with you first, Mel, because you've done, I think, as many activities and events as anybody in our circle. How, because I know your brain even works like this, you're a pretty methodical kind of person when you're going after doing things. And so, how do you change your plans? Do you have a way of double checking like I was talking about in the show tonight?
Well, yes and no.
Okay, now, that's a good honest answer.
Well, you got to be able to adapt to whatever comes along, because nothing ever goes the way it's planned.
Okay. So adaptation is part of that process then.
Yeah. Being able to see what's happening and go for it from there is how you got to work it.
It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we can have double checking and then troubleshooting both.
Yeah. This last show, while I was backing, I got one of those stand-up fans.
Yeah.
You know, one of the white ones that you can get at Walmart or wherever. Out in the shed, and I thought, you know, I just ought to toss that in there just in case. We got down to Charlotte, and it was 95 degrees in the shade, high humidity, and we were on asphalt, which adds another 15 degrees.
Yeah, really uncomfortable.
With really no breeze. That fan came in handy. My little generator just operated that fan quite well, and I set the wipe right in front of it.
You said, "Oh, thank heaven for a fan when you need it."
Yeah. Now, if I would have given in to my first thought of, nah, we won't need it, I would have left it at home and would have turned out that we needed it. So,
Well, then
you just,
didn't your experience help you with that? That helped make that decision.
it probably did.
Yeah. You've done it enough that you just said, hey, I think this is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, it probably did. It was just one of those second thoughts, and it, it, yeah, let's just toss it in there just in case. What the heck?
What the
I
heck?
got room. It
Well,
slid into the trailer
I think
quite
that's
well.
part of what contributes to your success too, because you do have the ability to compensate for that, and then that forethought showed up, making the whole show a lot more easier and more comfortable. I'm gonna go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, well, my whole life has basically been learn to adapt and continue on. I was a service brat growing up, so every few years we were moving.
Yeah.
Then I got in the service myself, so I was moving, and whatever orders came up, they said go, you went. And then aerospace industry, you worked until your portion of the contract was ended and you were down the road. There wasn't anything, it's job security.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, you learn to adapt.
More of the same. I'm going to jump over to Jose's on with us tonight. Jose's another master in the program. You do lots of event marketing now, Jose. Have you got down to kind of like a checklist for your travels and your trips and shows? No mic. There you go.
Okay, am I on?
Yeah, now you are.
Okay, I'm on right. Okay. Well, I got kind of a checklist of things that I need to put into my cases. I got like about 3-4 briefcases that I gotta take with me. So I just gotta make sure that I won't forget anything. And luckily, one of the things that I've learned now is find out where the Lowe's or the Home Depot is, just in case. And
Yeah.
I've had to use that for PVC,
Yeah.
or light bulbs. Just things that you don't really think that you might need, but things wear out, burned out. So yeah. But the other thing that I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to cut back on the stuff that I take with me. Trying to be more
Yeah.
pack less.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have bought the stands for my banners. Paid a couple $100 for those, but they're pretty bulky. So I've seen people that just use hooks on the back curtains, and just works just as well.
Yeah.
So it's less stuff that I gotta carry.
Your booth space is very expensive now, so you do have to do more planning and preparing. It can just break you financially to go and have a show completely drop in the tank.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I hope that you all have. I just was trying tonight to jog everybody's thinking. Is there anybody made a comment, want to throw anything else into it? Ron, you've done an awful lot of event marketing with me over the years.
Yeah. Well, when I was with DeWalt, luckily I could take my stuff that I needed all the time and I put it in like those big plastic containers, and it got shipped with the show all the time. But when I did them on my own, I always had a checklist, and even today, it's ingrained in my mind with a checklist that I have a checklist. If we go on vacation, I have a checklist what I have to pack, and I go by the checklist, and I don't forget anything. But in my when I did the in-store events, I always had a checklist, a blank one with unchecked, but with what I needed. I had it in my case where I had my supplies, and before the day before the show, I'd pull out and make sure I had everything checked off, that it was in those cases, so that I could have everything at the show at the event that I needed.
The word I want you to all write on your bathroom mirrors with your Sharpie tonight is double check, because it doesn't do enough good when you've got the checklist and then you don't come back and kind of double check your own habits, because we all are forgetful. We all have things we overlook, and it can be really expensive and really difficult and mess up your productivity when you don't have it really double check it, and work with that often. No pilot dares get in an airplane and not have their checklist. It's just almost a kiss of death. Jose?
Yeah, one of the things that happened to me last year while I was doing some of the engraving events at Costco, I decided to change the configuration of the oiler and the regulator, because I got an extra water trap in there.
Yeah.
So I put a new water trap in there and set it up, put the new nipple on it and everything. I got to to the Costco, and now I found out that the connector on the hose is a male, and the one that I put on the trap is also a male. So
Uh-oh.
I was panicking.
Stuck, yeah, absolutely stuck.
Yeah, so what I happened to have a female, in my thing there, but I didn't have any tools. Luckily, I was there at Costco, so I went into the section where they were selling the tools. I borrowed a pair of pliers and stuff like that, and I was able to change it before I got started. But talking about panicking, oh my God,
I have one of those yellow tool boxes that's got lots of spaces in them. They're just thin. They're like a little carry briefcase thing, a little plastic 2-inch deep thing. And I've got just about every part, repair, little tools, little twist ties, everything that can help me save a show is in that little, and that's where my handpiece goes. That's where my turbine goes. That's where my burrs go. I got the things that I absolutely have to have that are terrible to find anywhere else. That little case goes with me every event that I do now. And you learn the hard way, unfortunately. Occasionally you get out and it snows. And that's not good. Jay, by now you should have a checklist going. You a checklist kind of guy?
I've actually got 3 different checklists that I run. I run a pre-show checklist. I run a list while I'm at the show to keep track of, what I use and all that, so I know what I need to replace when I get back. And then I have a post-show checklist where I go through and make sure, everything is back in the container where it's supposed to be, back in its proper tote, and all set up and ready to go to load up next time.
Wow. Now that's a thought. I don't think I've ever worked with a post checklist. That sounds like the military coming out in you, Jay.
Yeah, that it definitely is.
That's a good thought. How do you go at your shows, Lance? You do quite a bit now. You're doing a lot more.
Well, for me, whether I'm going on a trip or going on a show, I always plan ahead, get a checklist. I get everything. It seems like 4 to 3 days in advance or something. I'm getting everything together in in boxes and all stuff in the living room, just getting it all ready because I can't toss it out in the truck early. But I found that's not where you got to stop. You get it all there and all right, and you check off everything in the checklist, and then you load it in the truck. Except you don't load it in the truck till the next morning.
Yeah.
Well, I have a checklist that I go through that once it hits the truck and I've loaded it, then I check it off. Because I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the checklist, I said, it's all checked off from last night, and I left one big box of something just sitting in the middle of the living room just because I was in a hurry. Yeah. So besides doing the checklist, I go through it and check it off when it hits the truck, when it's in the trailer, for example, or something like that.
Good
but
idea.
The post checklist I like. That's a good idea. I've
really
forgotten things.
That's, and if you leave something at a show, you're toast, Yeah,
it's gone.
Our stuff is valuable enough. I've actually done a couple of shows where the drill was stolen at the show. What they do is they come through and cut your hose with a knife, and they know how expensive the turbines are, the handpiece, so that's what they'll take. They don't take the regulator, don't take anything else. So just grab your drill. And so now I've got a habit where when I'm at an event, I don't leave the booth without taking the drill and slipping it in my pocket. It's the one thing I do not want to have stolen. And we replace quite a few handpieces every summer when people doing shows and just don't know that the unscrupulous out there that can steal it from you so quickly is just miserable. So get in the habit. Take that drill with you. When you go to the bathroom, just pop it off the tubing and slip it in your pocket so you don't lose it. All right. I think we might have come out with a checklist, recheck, double check, and then before you go home check. That's pretty smart stuff, Jay. Appreciate the comment. Anybody else? Joni Beck, you've done a lot of shows in your lifetime. How do you approach them?
Well, it may sound silly, but I set everything up out in the yard outside of my studio. And I put the tent up, and I start setting and where I'm going to put everything and put everything in the places I have marked off.
Wow.
And then I could take them step by step by step in my car or, my truck, whatever I'm going to be using.
And load them up that way. That's tremendous. That's probably what a woman would do and a man won't do. Does that sound like that to you guys? Actually, I've known at times, Joni, when Tam would do the same thing, especially if we were going to change and do a different show. She would set everything up and then come at it from that same perspective to try and see ahead of time. Because if you're already there and you don't have something with you or you want to change something, then it's really tough. It's really hard to make it work then, isn't it? How about Nick? You've done a lot of shows. You got yourself, I would expect you to be a checklist guru.
Well, I don't have a checklist per se. What I do is something similar to what Ron was saying. I basically have created my storage boxes for the specific items I have and keep everything for the show
in those same
there,
places.
In the same places. And before I do the show, I go in and make sure I have enough of like the business cards and things like that, enough supplies. Keep like a first aid kit and things like that in there, and it's just always there. It's not something that I'm sharing with some, other things that are going on. It is just for my
shows.
For my show.
Just
and started going with the clear storage boxes, which helps me see which box it is pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That helps me.
That does help.
And so, not a checklist per se, but kind of. I mean, everything's there.
Well, you've defined it. You've got it all isolated, so you have organized it.
Yes, it is all organized.
And so it makes it a lot easier. I've moved a couple of times, and in those two last moves now, everything has really gotten messed up. I got stuff all over the place. I kept thinking if it hadn't been for Brian Beatty to be ahead of this last weekend, I'd have had a nightmare trying to get through the weekend. He did it for me, so that was really helpful. Really helpful. Any other comments? Anybody's done some shows? Think about your checklist of what next 10 things to do, and then go back through and double check them right now and try and up the ante. Try and see if you can't see places and ways where you can improve your efficiency, improve your productivity, your batting average. Even when people are really good at certain tasks, often it takes an outside view of someone to come in and give you some ideas and some clues. I'm going to sit down with Brian now and try and I've done 1,000 shows. I've really had a lot of experience with it. And there's ways to improve your effectiveness at shows and particular events. And when we start in January and do that series of webinars where we talk about those kinds of things that are just our mixture of our experience is what I think is going on now, and it's helping us so much. We're sharing the kind of things that most artistic efforts, they don't have that kind of advantage. They don't have any impact from anybody else. So they're literally flying by the seat of their pants, and that's not a great way to learn. That can be really expensive and really troublesome. Now, one last thing before we finish up tonight. What I want to suggest that when you're doing an event, you're going after an impact of exposure. It's a way and a means of getting exposure. And I want to have you double check that you're getting the interest of people who would be clients, who would patrons that would buy your work, but also you're capturing the relationships of people who want to learn how to do what you're doing, and that you're doing both of those and getting a list. And then that list is going into a computer somehow so that you can grow that as a database. Between now and the time I check out, if I'm not helping each of you learn how to build a database underneath your life, and you learn to cultivate that, you're spinning your wheels. You go out and do the event, and then you don't ever multiply the effort. And if Woody Searle taught me one thing, it was how to multiply the work effort. Why go do this show and then not have the productivity of that show improve everything and grow over here? And if you'll gradually grow that database, then when you don't want to do shows anymore, you'll have a database from hell where you begin to sell from. Ron is taking on the idea of professional selling and coming up with some concepts that I think are going to be really productive for us as a network. Because where we're all soft is still our more professional way of communicating and interacting in order to get a sale. A professional salesperson will direct the conversation to the point they've got a much better odds of success in selling something. And the average person just communicates. They just interact, and that's as far as it goes. They don't direct how the conversation is going. And I watched that with Brian this weekend. I'm going to try and help him to begin to up the ante a little bit here, that it ends up going in the direction that he wants it to, rather than just do the exposures, rather than just do the carving and then say goodbye, see you sometime down the road. You can't leave in business and marketing, you can't leave it up to chance. You can't leave it up to accident, because if you're depending on the public to respond, it's usually not likely that they will. It's a little like what I heard on the preemptive news shows of the day today from President Obama. Is going to announce to us tonight what he's going to do in the Middle East. And the second guessing going on is that he talks a lot, but he generally doesn't get it done. And I don't know how you manage with that. That to me, there better be some things that you actually do get done, or your individual productivity is going to really be questionable. So it's a serious subject. I hope it's one that helped you a little bit tonight. Work at it, look at it, think about it, chew on it, and as you chew on it, swallow a few things that might change how you've done it in the past. And perhaps you'll have Woody Searle reach into your soul and whisper to you, keep going, son, there's a lot yet to learn. He was pretty interesting to have as a coach, and I will never be able to repay him. All right, gang, thank you for coming. Appreciate your mixture with the show, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow night and go at this again. Thank you so much for taking your busy time and participating, and we'll catch you tomorrow night. Good night, everybody.